Yo, what's going on YouTube? I hope you guys are all having yourselves a fantastic day. Now, this isn't really going to be a step-by-step tutorial because I'm still learning Blender myself and it's a little bit hard to explain everything, but I am going to be showing you guys my process from start to finish and explaining what I can. Now, this watch is just part of a multi-part series for one of my creations that I'll put on screen right now. There's a little teaser for you guys. Basically, I created a theme of a bunch of luxury goods for my character, so if you guys are interested in that, be on the lookout for all these videos coming out. I've been creating in Blender more than I have been editing these videos, so I do have a bunch of content stored up. I just have to put all the videos together and get them out. But anyways, let's get right into this. To start off, I went across the internet on Google Images and also the Audemars Piguet website to find a couple reference images. Now, if you guys noticed, the front reference and the back reference were two different watches, but it's not that big of a deal. So I just lined those up best as possible, and I also found like a side reference image as well, but I also had to bring that into Photoshop to clean up the background just to make it transparent and make it a little bit easier to see while it's in Blender. And then we got right to modeling. So I started off, as you guys saw, with a circle, and then we extruded the circle out a little bit, scaled it up, which gives it a little bit more width. And while in edit mode, duplicated the circle and brought it forward on the x-axis a little bit in order to make that top face sort of shape. Once I got the inner vertices of the outer circle lined up, the inner circle of the face, that was a tongue twister and I don't even know if that made sense. I then selected the outer vertices and lined them up to get that octagon sort of shape for the face. Then we just combined the two circles together by selecting 4 vertices at a time, then hitting the F button to create a face. Then we're going to select the outer vertices once again, scale them up a bit, actually extrude them, and then scale them up a bit. And then we're going to grab them using the G button, and then we're going to move them along the x-axis in order to give them that edge sort of shape that is on the watch, kind of like an angled edge there. And then just clean it up a little bit, making sure it lines up with our reference image. And then you should get something that sort of looks like this. So now that our face is done pretty much, well, at least the basic portion of it is done. We'll add in all the gems and the screws and stuff at the end of the video later on. We're just trying to get the general idea going here. We're going to go back to that inside circle that we started with. Select all the vertices by clicking one of them and then holding Shift Alt and then clicking one next to it. And then we're going to extrude that all the way back to the x-axis and line it up with the back, like inner side of the watch that would be on your wrist. Now keep in mind that the band goes around this part, so you're not really going to see the middle part of what we're making here, but you just want to line up the angle from your inner circle to the back portion that you can see that comes out of the band. And then you're just going to extrude that out a little bit more along the x-axis, and then one more time and scale it down a little bit just to give it like a reverse angle of what we did on the face. Don't forget to save quite often. Okay, so now it's time to make the watch's band. So I brought in another plane, rotated it 90 degrees, and then started lining up with our reference image. Now keep in mind that these are angled and will be angled, so this is where it comes in handy to line up your reference images properly, or at least as close to proper as possible. Also, another note is that these are not perfect rectangles. I mean, as you guys can see, there's some sort of shape, I don't really know, and the top is going to be angled in, which we'll get into in a second, but just to get the general shape, I added in some loop cuts with Control R, and then like everything else, just try to line them up as best as possible with the reference image. So once I got the first few links done, I just bounced back and forth between the side reference image and also the front reference image. I mean, this is an obvious statement, but it also helps when you have reference images that are all from the same product or object. So I have 3 different watches technically for my reference images. I honestly couldn't find reference images that I liked for the main watch that I'm making, which is the front reference. So, I mean, they're all generally pretty much the same, but also ran into a little bit of an issue and had to improvise, as you guys will see. So I just lined them up best as possible and then just improvised from there. Anyways, as I was rambling, I selected that top row of vertices and extruded them along the y-axis inside towards the face to give it that angled look a little bit. And then just continue to make some more of these links and line them up best as possible, as I've been saying. This is also where I was having that issue I mentioned. Whenever I would line up the links with the front reference image, they wouldn't line up with the side reference image and vice versa. It kind of makes sense because the front reference image is flat, whereas the side has the actual angles in it. So this is where I had to improvise and just think about how a watch band is, pretty much circular. It's not perfectly circular, but it goes around the wrist. So that's where I had to improvise, and eventually we got something that looks like this. And then we're going to hop into edit mode and duplicate our I guess, 1/2 of the wristband. And you want to make sure you're in edit mode, because if you're not in edit mode and you do this in object mode, then you're going to have two separate objects and it's going to make it a lot harder to combine them together, in my opinion. So you're just going to select all the vertices, hit Control M, and then flip it on the X or Y axis, whatever way you have it set up, just so it's the opposite. And then you're going to hit G and move it over to the other side. And now you have your like outer skeleton, I guess you could say, for your watch band. Now we're just going to go around the watch band and select two vertices from each side, and then hit the F button again to create that face. We're going to do this for the outside and the inside, so I'm just going to speed this up real quick for you guys. Also, initially I added one loop cut to this first face, to get it out of the way from when we add all the gears to the inside of the watch. But don't worry about that too much, because I ended up changing it later at the end. Added more loop cuts in to get a smoother inside. And now we're going to do the inside of the watch band here. I keep saying watch band, it's wristband. And at this point I could see it all coming together pretty nicely. Still have a lot of detail to add to make this even better, but I mean, we already have that watch shape going quite nicely. So to clean up that inside portion of the face a little bit more, because the outer watch band faces were protruding through it too much, I just deleted all the faces around the bezel or face, whatever. I'm saying faces way too many times here, I'm sorry. And then just added a bunch of loop cuts around wristband, and just took that extra little bit of time to make it cleaner, so when I added the gears in, we wouldn't just have a bunch of protruding faces coming through. So I just worked my way around the back of the watch with all the loop cuts, extruding some of the vertices and bringing them in, then selecting all 4 vertices and hitting F again to create that face. And then just moving it around to where the faces were just touching the border of the bezel, making sure that they don't stick too far in or too far away to where they create a little gap. Once I got the back part or the inside of the wristband part done, it was time to line up the outside part with the face or bezel, whatever you want to call it. The vertices were already extruded, so just grabbing the vertices and then moving them along the y-axis up until there's no gap in between the bezel and the wristband. And then after that, I also had to line up the outer edge of the wristband with the face, because after checking the reference image, they were slightly off, so I just wanted to get that a little bit more correct. I also made the little dial that goes on the side of the watch, which is how I knew that they were lined up incorrectly, the wristband and the face. So I just lined those up, and then it was time to move on to the inner workings of the watch. Now that's looking a lot cleaner. It's lining up with the edge. There's no like sticking out parts or anything like that. Now it's time to make all the gears and the inner workings of the watch. I'm not gonna lie, I was kind of dreading this part a little bit, because I mean, just look how complicated that looks. So the way I decided to tackle this was to kind of break it down into 3 parts. All the rose gold parts, all the gold parts on the inside, and then the silver parts. And the plan was just to keep them in like their own separate groups, so when I go to add color, I just have to add the color once and it'll add all the gold parts gold, and so on. Big gold gear in the bottom left of the watch kind of stood out the most to me. Well, I shouldn't say stood out the most to me, but I don't know why I decided to do this one first. So I just added in a circle and then extruded the circle and scaled it up a bit, just like we did at the beginning. And then I tried a few different ways to get like the little inside parts of the gear. I don't know what to call it, like the spokes, if it was a bicycle wheel. I don't know what the proper terminology is for it, but we'll just call it that. First 2 spokes I made were pretty much being made like way too complicated, so eventually I found out a little bit of an easier way to do it. It's not exactly like perfect fitting to the gear, but it looked a lot cleaner than when I was trying to make it way too complicated. So there you have it, our first little gear is done. Not too bad, and just again, like everything else, just try to make it fit the reference image as best as possible. So we're going to go ahead and repeat the same process for the gold gear at the top, the kind of medium sized one. Now there was less spokes in this one, so I didn't just duplicate this one like I did for the other gold ones that you'll see in a second. And plus, I mean, it's good practice just to keep making the different things anyways. And then for these last 2 little gold gears, just duplicated the first one that we made, just because I mean most of it's hidden anyways, as you can see if you look at the reference image. These gears are going to be behind both the rose gold and the silver or platinum, whatever it is. Alrighty, so that finishes up our little gold gears here. And so moving on, I decided to make like the little eyelets, I'm not sure what they're called, the little markers that tell you what time it is or what hour it is. So I brought in a cube and added a subdivision surface modifier with Control 4, and then just started modeling the shape that I thought fit. It's kind of like a tic tac, or like if you cut a tic tac in half, it's kind of what it looks like. Once I got a shape that I liked and that semi-resembled what I was going for, I just used the reference image to line it up properly and place it right where it needs to be going. And then after that, I realized, I didn't notice this at first, but I realized that it again has like kind of, it's not completely like roundish, it kind of has like some harsher edges. So I went ahead and added some loop cuts in order to get that shape a little bit more sharp. And now it kind of looks more like an Altoids can, which fits exactly kind of what we're looking for. And then after that, I added in some more loop cuts. And then I selected some faces in order to add some indentation into these little things, whatever they're called. Because as you can see in the reference image, there's like rose gold on the outside of them, and then there's like an indent of silver. So again, I wanted to recreate that to be a little bit more accurate. And here I was just testing with random colors just to make sure my theory was going to work on if I could add different colors into this, and it did. So here's a quick little example of what it's going to look like, and later on in the video we'll switch them to the metal. So now we're going to duplicate this in edit mode, and then just go around all of the different hour markers and just place them where they're supposed to go following the reference image. Alright, now that our hour markers are placed, I decided to go back to the gold gears real quick and add a solidify modifier, and just add a little bit of depth into them just to make them look a little bit more like gears instead of just the little plane that they looked like before. Adding the solidify modifier also came in handy because it helped me figure out how to place all the gears and all the pieces inside together, being that a lot of them are combined together with screws or whatever and on top of each other. But anyways, next up was the rose gold pieces. Now this is pretty much just like what we've been doing, just bring in a plane, rotate it 90 degrees, and then just extrude each part, rotate it a little bit to follow the little pieces that are inside. As you can see, my parts aren't exactly perfect, but I got them as best as I could. Some parts were definitely harder than others, but I think I'm going to skip through most of this, or at least speed up a lot of it, because I mean it's pretty much the same thing. So after I got a few more of the rose gold pieces done, I decided it was probably time to create some space inside of the watch face, just to see like how the gears and stuff would set on top of each other. So I just spaced them out a little bit along the x-axis, because I knew I was going to be adding more pieces in, especially that big silver chunk of pieces, which takes up most of the inside anyways. Just remember, at any point you can move them around at any point, just so they can fit to your liking or what you think looks best. And then when I was done playing around with like the placement of the gears and stuff, I thought making the hands of the watch would actually be kind of fun, so I just decided to do that real quick. Once again, we brought in another circle, and then just played around extruding them on the X and Y axis, scaling them up and down to give that little bit of depth that you can see in the reference image. As you can see, the circles don't line up perfectly, one is bigger than the other. Then we just extruded out a few of the vertices on the circles into the actual hands of the clock, the hour and the minutes. And just like we did with the hour markers, at one point we selected faces along each hand and gave them an indentation using I and then G to move them in a little bit. So pretty much the same steps that we've been doing throughout this whole piece, just on different parts. And then just to save some time, we selected one of the hands in edit mode, hit Shift D to duplicate, Control M on the X-axis, I believe, Y-axis, one of them, just to flip it completely over, and then just combined it with the circle back in the middle, and now we have both our hour and minute hand. And now we're looking really good. It looks like we have an actual watch going on here. And the seconds hand was actually like the easiest to make. Just extruded out a few points and then just brought them all the way out to the end and just scaled them down just to make the little pointy tip. But I did forget to record that part, just like I did with the little dial on the side. After the watch hands, I decided to go back and make the silver parts in the middle. So once again, we brought in another circle, rotated it 90 degrees on the y-axis, brought it up to this top little part up here, extruded it out with E, and then scaled it up to get the outer vertices right there on the circle, and then just worked my way, just like everything else, around the silver parts. Now I will say I modeled pretty much as I could. I'm a little bit hesitant saying as much as I could. I could have modeled all the parts as best as possible, but some things were pretty hard to see and I couldn't model them properly. And also, I realized that some of the parts left out actually made the watch look better. Probably not in real life, but just because I couldn't tell how some of the shapes looked, it just looked like this big hunk of metal in the background, and it just kind of lost like a lot of the pieces like individually. So with this watch, there's obviously a lot of circles on the inside, so I just kept duplicating them with Shift D and then bringing them around to where either the rubies on the inside sit or where the bolts sit, just to save some time and keep a little bit of consistency on these pieces as well. I just want to make sure that I'm clear that I'm also duplicating again in edit mode. All the silver parts I'm doing are all in edit mode, or I've been duplicating in edit mode rather, because it just makes it easier to color them all equally at the end instead of just having to click through each individual gear, color them. It's not too bad that way, but it's just easier this way in my opinion. And also you can see how the solidify effect comes in handy here. being able to move these gears around on top of each other and around each other, kind of like how they would in real life. Now we have a watch that actually looks like an AP, and I was super stoked on this. I mean, you could get by with this if you wanted to. There's a few more details that we're going to go through, but those are just the final touches, and I think that really pulls the watch completely together. Here's just the inside of the watch without all the face and the band, just so you can get a little better look at the gears and stuff by itself. And as you can see, it matches up quite nicely with the reference image. When you flick it on and off, all the parts seem to be where they need to be. Now it's time to go back to the face and add in to where the gems sit around the bezel. And this is another one of those things I did forget to record, which is my bad. But basically, just lined up the reference image, brought in a cube, and then extruded out 4 sections. Actually, I don't even think I extruded out 4 sections. I just did one big cube, or like one cube, and then did loop cuts to 4 equal sections. And then I duplicated those cubes after I had set them properly with the reference image. And the reason why I duplicated them is because one of them we're going to use for the Boolean effect, which you'll see in a second, and then the other one is how we're going to color all the gemstones. So here we go, we have them nice and duplicated now. Now I'm renaming one of them as gemstone bool or something like that, just so you know the difference between which ones are the gems and which one are going to be, hidden. And then you're going to select the face or the bezel, add the Boolean modifier, and then use the little dropper and then click on your cube, and then you're going to hide your cube, and that'll leave like the indentation that you guys saw a few seconds ago. Again, my bad for forgetting to record that part, but I think you guys can figure it out. Now with the duplicated cube, that's going to be the gems. I just moved them back inside a little bit along the x-axis with G, or by pressing G, and then got them to where they were just under the bezel. So there was a little bit of indentation, but not that much. And then the last part of our bezel is to add these bolts or screws, whatever you want to call them, in. So I just brought in a cube, added a few loop cuts, and then lined them up properly. Then after we get them lined up with the reference image, we're going to press G on all the vertices and bring it out of the bezel just barely, because the screw isn't quite flush. It's pretty much flush, but I don't think it's quite flush. And then we're going to select the inside faces and hit I to indent them a little bit more and give us that little space where the screwdriver would be able to screw them in there. And then bam, there's our bolts. And then we're just going to duplicate them all in edit mode, just so it's all the same layer and you don't have like 1,000 layers of different bolts. And just rotate them around the bezel to fit where all the other screws go. Now the watch itself looks absolutely great at this point, but something that I felt was lacking was the band. Something about the band didn't look correct, and that's because I realized like you have these 2 little things that I missed in the band. Actually 3 now that I think about it. You have these little indentations because the bands, or links maybe, I think links, or link, I can't speak, is the proper term. They have these indentations between each one, so it's not like flush against each other. So how I fixed that was I brought in a cube, scaled it along the y-axis to make it longer, and then grabbed only the top 4 vertices of the cube and brought them in, scaled them down to kind of get like this angled look. And then at each angled intersection, I guess you would call it. Oh god, this is starting to get hard to explain. I placed them in, and we'll later add a Boolean effect in at all of them, and instead of the watch looking like one big old piece of metal, it actually looked like a bunch of smaller links put together. So it's just a small detail. It's definitely not necessary. Could have got away with it without it, but I just think it just brings it to a whole nother level. And as you can see, as we apply the Boolean effect, we get that little indentation there. And we're just going to do that all the way around the outside and the inside of the watch, and it'll look something like this. So I think this little addition just brings a whole new level to how good the watch looks. Makes it look a lot more realistic than just like a hunk of metal. It's not perfect, but it still looks pretty damn good. Next up, it was time to add like the little cube, octagon sort of things, hexagon, I don't even know what to call them. The other parts of the band. Maybe those are the links. I honestly have no idea. Anyways, you guys can just see it on the screen. We're just adding those guys in all the way around the outside of the watch band. Again, just another level of detail that helps bring the whole piece together. And this is what it looks like after adding all of those in. Now for the last part of the watch before we start adding in the colors was to add in this back little tag or logo as well. So we're going to do that with 2 planes. Go ahead and put the plane in there and then rotate it to fit onto the back of the band. And then we're just going to bring in a whole nother plane and start modeling the logo, the AP logo. And then once we have what we like for the logo, we're going to go ahead and do the same Boolean sort of effect or modifier or whatever. And it'll give us that indentation to make it look like the AP is engraved into that tag. And now our AP is pretty much complete here besides the color aspect of it. I went ahead and switched the matte cap real quick just so you guys can see what it looks like with a metallic sort of look on it, which is why it switched to red. That's not the final color for it, obviously. And let's go ahead and get right into messing around with the colors. So in order to get our gold and rose gold sort of look, I ended up using this little setup that I learned in a few different videos ago, and it's also the same setup that I used for the gold grills and the teeth of our character Kevin. And basically I just use a Musgrave texture and a noise texture, hook it up into a color ramp, and then hook that up into our normal base color principal BSDF, and then just boost the metallic all the way up and play with the roughness a little bit just till you get something that you like. For the silver color, just drop the white color in the BSDF to a little bit of a gray, then boost the metallic up and the roughness down a little bit until you get something that you like. Then we just use the same rose gold material for our hour markers, and then selected all those inner faces like we did when we did the green and pink little tryout sort of ordeal, and then switch them to that silver just to give that indentation look just like in our reference image. Then we're going to add the rubies in with a nice little pink color, pinkish red color. Boost that metallic up to kind of give it that glare sheen kind of look. And finally, it was time to add all the gemstones in the rainbow color around the bezel. I selected an initial color, which was just the first red, orangish color at the top left of the bezel. Boosted the metallic up and turned everything all the way down. And then I went around and just selected each individual face that is supposed to represent a different gem, and then just added a new material already into like the selected material, I guess you could say, and then assigned only the selected face to the next color. So I just continued going around the entire bezel with the different gems, trying to match up best as possible to the reference images, as well as trying to keep like a fluid transition from all the colors into the next set of colors. I wanted like the gradient look to look pretty smooth. I didn't want it to just be like super jagged, I guess. Not jagged, but I could tell when I had like colors that weren't close enough to the previous color, it just didn't look right and it stood out too much, whereas like the colors I ended up with, it ended up flowing very nicely together. And then finally, what I wanted to do was create this sort of texture on the actual watch itself. Now this watch has what's called like frosted diamonds on it, where I think it's just diamond dust like on the outside of it. I actually don't even know, to be honest, but it looks pretty cool. It's not just like straight silver or straight gold, straight platinum, whatever material it is. And so how I did this is I actually just used the same gradient setup for the metals that I chose, but I just bumped up the noise texture. I did this in one of my previous videos where I made my island boy Kevin, where he's on an island, and I used this for like the sand texture. So I did the same thing and I just changed the gradient to make it look silver, and then bumped up that noise texture and detail a lot to give it this sort of like fine kind of material look on it. It looks like something's all over. It's not just one straight color. It is a little bit easier to see when I have it as like the yellow sandish color, which you can see at some point during this part. But as you spin the watch around, it still comes up a little bit in the silver, and it made me a lot happier knowing that I at least tried to get that frosted look rather than just a straight up metallic silver look, which would have been the easier way to do it. But anyways, it's fine. So this is how I created this Audemars Piguet Royal Oak watch. It's one of my favorite watches in the world, like I said, and now my character Kevin can rock it whenever I want him to. He'll be dripping with it every once in a while, flexing with it. So I want to say thank you all for watching. I'm sorry I didn't explain everything like perfectly. I'm still learning Blender a lot myself. I just wanted to take a stab at trying to explain my thought processes and a little bit of like how I actually did this. So if you learned something, please let me know in the comments below. Feedback is always appreciated because it helps me as well. And YouTube, I hope you guys all have yourselves a fantastic day. We'll catch you in some more upcoming videos. Like I said, this is going to be part 1 of that luxury picture that I put at the beginning. I'll put it up again right here. So I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.